Welcome back into another edition of Mic Drop here on the Believe Network and available every your podcast and on Sirius XM stations. This is now our first show of 2025, so Happy New Year. I will allow you all to say Happy New Year for another week or so maybe, but midway of January I cut it off, so get your Happy New Year's in. I am your host as always, Mike Asti, still here in the new year, and on this edition of the show we are going to talk some Steelers football because the regular season about to end and the postseason about to begin, and a lot has been discussed about the Steelers in recent weeks, to say the least. I'm going to have that conversation for this episode with a Pittsburgh media colleague of the Tribune-Review, Tim Benz. You see and hear him all through the Pittsburgh media scene. So, Tim, happy to have you on, man. How are you? How was your holiday? New Year? Happy New Year to you now that we can.
Yeah, I guess I got to say Happy New Year quick to make sure I'm in line with your mandate.
It's not just my mandate. It's Larry David's mandate, actually. I'm taking this from Larry David. I believe he gives you until January 7th.
I remember David Letterman would ask people like, hey, how are your holidays in March?
Okay. That's asinine. No, that's crazy. Yeah, like my birthday is January 26th.
I think it became a running bit after a while.
Yeah, so that's the full cutoff. But yeah, if you're going to do it in March, well, maybe how are your holidays? Because there's a couple. There's Valentine's Day. There's some that are into the spring. But yeah, we can say Happy New Year right now. We'll see if it continues to be Happy New Year for the Pittsburgh Steelers there, as I just gave you kind of a boring segue. But what I do want to ask you before we get into maybe any of the off the field conversation and kind of what it's looking like for you in the postseason in the future. They're in the midst of a slump here, to put it mildly, but they have lost to quality teams, playoff teams, the Eagles, Ravens, and Chiefs. So those might have been games you chalked up as a loss entering the season, but they're still 3 straight losses. What do you think happened to lead these to be losses? What was the problems in these games? Is it just they're facing better teams? Is this exposing the team in some way that they're not really a contender? If you could kind of summarize those 3 losses, if there's a theme at all for you, what would that be?
The theme and the shortest answer, the shortest summary is what you just said. Yeah, they played better teams. They are proving that they are not in the AFC cut at the top with the Ravens, the Chiefs, and the Bills. They haven't played the Bills yet this year, but I certainly think that they are in that group. If you want to throw the Eagles in there from the NFC, I think if they had played the Lions, if they had played the Vikings, it would have been a 6-game losing streak. So I think that they are in that next cut of teams below the teams that have been in double-digit wins for a while now and have increased that win total as opposed to the Steelers who flatlined in that regard. I've always used the snow globe analogy for this season. I shouldn't say always. I guess since the start of the streak, it sort of struck me that maybe it was because I was getting ready for Christmas and I've seen too many Christmas movies. But if you took the whole schedule and you put it in a snow globe and you shook it up, and these 3 games that they lost fell at different points on the calendar, and flip-flop the 2 Raven results, and the Philly game was played when the Colts game was, and you flip-flop those 2 losses. But just any way you draw it up, if you take these 3 games and splice them somewhere else, all you're doing is reinforcing exactly what we thought this team was from Jump Street, which is maybe a 9-10 win team. If they beat the Bengals on Sunday, hey, maybe they're a game better than we expected they would be.
Yeah.
But there's nothing beyond maybe the 10-3 start that you're hoping will be regenerated by the time they get to the playoffs to give you any sort of belief that they belong in the conversation with the 3 other division winners besides the Texans. They could go to play Houston and win that and still be alive in the second weekend of the AFC playoffs.
Right.
And I'm not going to have a different opinion. I just think those 3 teams are better than the AFC. I think those NFC teams that I outlined before are better than the Steelers. And then they're maybe in the group of the next, which is slightly better than what we all projected them to be. I think if you gave Steelers fans the opportunity in August say, hey, look, they're going to be a 10-win team going into the last game of the season against Cincinnati. They're going to have a playoff spot sewn up. We would have signed up for that in blood, especially if you knew that the division hopes technically were still alive going into the last week of the season. We all would have taken it, and we just have our eye level got raised so much by what happened in the first 13 weeks of the season and Russ's quick integration into the offense that I think maybe we got out in front of our skis as to who the Steelers really are.
Yeah, and that tends to happen, and it's not the first time the Steelers have had a big win streak and then kind of parted away. But yeah, this is a different group, and most people probably would have taken that. But when you do it this way, which goes into the whole conversation on if the schedule hurt them or if it was just this way, and it probably is the reality of they're kind of a step below these teams that you're mentioning here, Tim Benz.
Yeah, I don't think the schedule hurt them because they lost it to two teams that did it. Two of the teams we're talking about that are better than them went through 100%. The 3 games in 11 days and won all 3 of them. And the Steelers lost by a combined minus 50 points.
And when and if you're doing like a power rankings type of thing, Houston, the team that you mentioned that, they could play and they could beat. What does that really say? Because the Ravens shellacked Houston and obviously beat the Steelers. And the Chiefs have been vulnerable this year, almost losing a few times, even though they've been winning, obviously. And they had their best game against the Steelers. So that doesn't look good, certainly at this point in the year. But you're better than what some would have thought because you do have at least the playoffs locked up. You maybe could have a favorable matchup coming up and win that. And that would be a step above where it's been. Again, Tim Benz here on Mic Drop, believe in Sirius XM, Mike Asti. As we were talking Steelers, would you go more to the offense declining a little bit and Russell Wilson not being what exactly he was when he first took the job back over after getting healthy? Anything there? Obviously, Pickens did miss some time. Or the defense, some bring up the defense, despite making plays at times, has not nearly been what maybe some nationally bring up, that they're a unit that can carry the team. That's not really been the case either. Which one of those has been a bigger problem for you? Okay.
I think it's more the latter because your expectations have to be higher for the defense. I think that maybe Wilson getting on board as quarterback raised the bar for what we can expect the offense to be, but it wasn't to the point that anytime they took the field, you expected that to be the better unit. The defense still has to play well enough that they can win games for the most part in the mid to high 20s at best. And if you look at where the major diminishing return has been from the defense, it's, as Mike Tomlin pointed out after the game against the Chiefs, they're not turning the ball over as much and they're not protecting the ball as much on offense. And those things are certainly coalescing negatively for Pittsburgh. Yeah. But the bigger issue, I think, is in the absence of turnovers, in the absence of a pass rush that generates 4 to 5 sacks per game or something like that. When you don't get the big splash plays on defense and it just comes to getting the other offense off the field by way of punts or 3 and outs, they don't do that at all. You look at the time of possession issue in Philadelphia, which was stark. You looked at the fact that they didn't force a 3 and out the entire day against Baltimore, and you saw how easily Kansas City controlled the flow of the game offensively when they were on that side of the ball. To me, that's the biggest story. If they're not turning the ball over or sacking the quarterback a ton, the defense doesn't appear to have a lot of teeth right now, and that's frightening going up against the Bengals because they gave up 38 to the Bengals, and they did force 3 turnovers. So, like that should really make people aware this is very much a threat of a game here in Week 18.
Yeah, 100%. And the Bengals still are caring about the year. They still have something to play for. And even when they were losing earlier in the year, they were making mistakes with bad interception at the end or turnovers. They were putting points up. So there's going to be points there. Joe Burrow's having a fantastic year. They can put points up. Again, Tim Benz here on Mic Drop with Believe in Sirius XM. Now off the field, and this is always a thing with the Steelers. You've been covering the team a long time, so have I, but you've been doing it even longer. And there's seemingly always drama around the Pittsburgh Steelers, certainly in recent years, to say the least. It calmed down a little bit at the beginning of the year, but it reared its ugly head during this losing streak. Number one, how much of a factor do you think any of the off-the-field conversation, any of the cryptic comments, any of the we're all doing our job except for one, the rumors, some nationally bringing up different players that maybe they feel are becoming malcontents off of maybe lesser than stellar seasons they're having. How much of all of that do you think this is a factor this year? And what do you make of what's true and what's not true on what you're hearing and what fans are talking about and what's being reported?
Yeah, I do think it's an issue. I think it's legit because I think we've seen the communication problems manifest in allowing people to be wide open or wide bleeping open, as Deshaun Elliott described, especially in the red zone with the tight ends, which has suddenly become a problem. But, I don't know for sure that they're talking about one specific guy, or at any time 10 guys are thinking of one other guy as the problem. Like,
Right.
Even locally, it's like this, trying to pick between Minkah Fitzpatrick or Cam Sutton. Who's everybody talking about? This guessing game of trying to
Yeah.
find whoever it is that this mystery
Yeah.
person is that can't be trusted. Even like Hard Knocks. I don't know if you saw the most recent edition of Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
Terrell Austin's in the meeting room and he's talking about this very topic, and they show two players. And the two players they show are Cam Sutton.
They're feeding into it.
And so they're either taking the local conversation and just feeding into it, or they know it's one of those two guys themselves because of everything that they have that they leave on the cutting room floor that's never allowed for anybody to see, which is why it's nowhere near the intriguing show that people make it out to be. But whatever the case.
Yeah. Or they're feeding into the narrative in terms of the fans that are watching, because
it was not a coincidence that they used Cam Sutton and Minkah Fitzpatrick as the two cutaways there. Now, 100%. I don't know that it's either of those guys. I don't know that it is one or two players. Maybe this is a case of, well, you take those quotes, and when Queen is saying that, he's talking about Watt. And when Watt is saying that, he's talking about Hayward. And when Hayward's talking about that, he's talking about Porter. When Porter's talking about that, he's talking about Highsmith. And when Highsmith is talking about that, he's talking about Jackson. When Jackson's talking about that, he's talking about Sutton. And when Sutton talks about that, he's talking about Elliott. It could be a case where everybody thinks that the 11th guy is a different 11th guy, but it can't be them. It's going to be somebody besides them. And I think that's the bigger problem here.
Yeah. And you probably are never going to fully figure it out, at least until the end of this season. Maybe we'll figure it out at some point in the off season, and there always are conversations like this.
But like this effort to make it sound like it's Cam Sutton, particularly because from the from the local media point of view.
Yeah.
The local Pittsburgh media and the fans are tremendous at finding the easiest possible scapegoat and just beating that guy into the ground.
100%.
And is there an easier scapegoat than Cam Sutton? The guy who left and then came back because Detroit didn't want him anymore because he didn't live up to his contract and got in trouble off the field.
Got off the field problems.
Didn't start playing until week 8. So let's just blame everything on him. And they're right.
100%.
Even if they're right and the other 15 guys are talking about him, then shame on them, because it's not just his fault. It's not just Cam Sutton's fault. And if we want to believe that, then I think we're all pretty stupid. But we did this to Matt Grzelcyk at the start of the year with the Penguins. We did it with Ryan Graves last year. We did it with Rowdy Tellez. It's the new guy who comes on board.
We did with Rowdy Tellez. Yes, we did with Rowdy Tellez. We do pick a player 100%. That is very, very true. It is fans and also media for sure, but not everybody. We're not doing it here on this show. The interesting part of that is you kind of do bring up a solid point that if it's one player, even if they're all talking about the same player, these are veteran leaders. Cam Hayward, one of the most respected players in football, TJ Watt, etc. It's not necessarily the greatest leadership tactic to air grievances and throw out one player under the bus when everyone is not necessarily having their best game either. There's more than just one player having a rough game or two. So that's kind of odd as well. But it's easier to pick the guy that maybe there are even some fans that didn't want back on the team because of what you detailed and off the field issues, versus national media. Some others bring up Minkah Fitzpatrick. He was the first person I saw brought up until people started doing actual reporting, and then it was getting to Cam Sutton. But let's face it, we both know Minkah's more popular among the fans. He came here. He had a great run early on, even though the team wasn't great. He's been a popular player among fans. They don't want it to be him. I think fans would rather.
And they sure don't want it to be TJ Watt or Cam Hayward.
And they don't want it to be Cam Hayward. They don't want it to be TJ Watt. If it was any of those guys, they would find a reason why it couldn't be them. And in reality, it's certainly probably not one player that they're bringing up.
Because the only thing we're better at doing in Pittsburgh when it comes to being sports fans and media members, the only thing we're better at than creating scapegoats is creating sacred cows. So, God forbid that it's anybody that you really want it to be. So even more reason to have it be somebody that you don't want it to be. And like that it has to be, because you don't want it to be one of your faves. It's got to be somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. If TJ Watt sat there and said Cam Hayward is this locker room cancer, and not obviously he's a great player in that locker room, but there would absolutely be fans that would somehow flip that and say that couldn't possibly be true. That, there are sacred cows, there are scapegoats. That's all very, very true. Again, Tim Benz here on Mic Drop with Believe and Sirius XM. I do want to get you out of here kind of projecting the future a little bit, because this is a conversation going on a little right now, but it really will get started once their season's over, certainly once that playoff exit happens. And I think we probably all agree it's going to happen prior to the Super Bowl, likely prior to the AFC title game, even if they would win a postseason game because of a matchup. And that is the future of the quarterback position. So Justin Fields there right now, Russell Wilson there right now. Russell Wilson, the guy, he's the veteran guy. He's kind of been able to revert his, rejuvenate his career a little bit, turn back the clock, revert the clock a little bit from where it was in Denver. But that's maybe now opening up some criticism for him now, of course. There are some that just don't like him. Obviously, Justin Fields younger and did win some games, but then it turned back to Russell Wilson. For next year, if it's you, would you like either one of those guys to get a contract, to be back, to be the guy? Do you think they should go into the draft and look for somebody, even maybe that would require trading up to finally find that guy of the future they never really are in position to go get? What do you think should be the strategy at QB, and maybe what do you think they're going to do? Because that's going to be an offseason conversation based on the situation right now and their future contracts that are in flux.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, again, going back to the snow globe concept that I mentioned before.
Yeah.
If you look at the offense with Wilson, and if it's at least good enough to beat teams that it should beat, it hadn't been that before that.
Right.
Just go back to when Mason Rudolph came in. As part of the reason some people wanted them to keep Rudolph was it was at least good enough with Rudolph to beat teams that it should have beaten in the three games down the stretch to help them get in the playoffs. And that wasn't necessarily as easy as making it sound, because they had to go to Seattle and win in Seattle, a place they never win, and they managed to do that. So,
right.
I was not a sign Russ at all costs guy.
Okay.
I think I'm going more not at all costs, but if you can get him in the $35 million range for 3 years or something like that, whatever exposure isn't too significant beyond the next two, then I would be inclined to keep Wilson, because he appears to have more in the tank at least than I expected. Maybe not enough to beat a top-notch defense.
Maybe not to be a Super Bowl winner again, but right. Yeah.
Right. But that said, they have so many other holes they're going to have to fill.
Yeah.
They got to, what are they going to do with Moore at left tackle? Okay. And then by extension, are they going to keep Isaac Seumalo at guard for the last year of his deal? Yeah. What are they going to do at wide receiver before we even get to George Pickens? Because you're going to have to extend Pickens. If you don't extend Pickens, he's going to be a nightmare next year. He might be even more of a nightmare if you do extend him. So 100%. If that's the concern, then they might want to consider trading Pickens, signing a T. Higgins, and drafting another wide receiver, which I don't think is the dumbest idea ever. You said, they don't have any. The two running backs, one of which would be restricted, and Jalen Warren, the other of which you decided you didn't want to give the fifth-year option to in Harris. So I imagine they're looking at something different there. Are they going to stick with the same corner conversation? What are they going to do with Dante Jackson? Now that he's been here for 1 year, do they like him enough to extend him? There are holes all over the place that you're going to have to address. Like, has Ogunjobi got 1 more year? And if he does, I can't remember off the top of my head. And if he does, is that the number that you want? I don't think it is. It's you're going to have to address a lot of different things with this team before you even get to quarterback, or you should probably just start with quarterback for a friggin' change, and then make sure that is addressed. And they're not going to be drafting in a position, regardless of what happens with the Bengal game and going into the playoffs. They're not going to be drafting in a position where
that's the issue. They'd have to trade up 100%.
Yeah. In a year that by all accounts isn't that great for quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And the last time they extended themselves in a year where it wasn't that great for quarterbacks, they got Kenny Pickett. And they kept him for all of 2 years, and then they traded him to Peanut to Philadelphia.
Right.
So, I would if they don't keep Russ, they better have a clear-cut plan. And that clear-cut plan, if it's to give more to Justin Fields to be the starter, but not as much as Russ, okay, then you got to trust him to be a quarterback.
And Russ is going to be he's going to be cheaper than, if you want to go free agency for a veteran for some reason for next year and really go for it, somehow you want to try to pluck Sam Darnold or something if Minnesota doesn't keep him. He's younger. He's having a great year. Russ likely as a vet is going to be cheaper than anyone else on the market as well in terms of veterans that might be available. So if you're looking to save a buck, have a veteran that can get you in the playoffs, and then worry about the draft when you have so much that you need. Yeah, one more year, Russ might at least be okay. I mean, what are you going to do?
I don't think they're going to be able to get him for 1 year. I mean, they're going to have to get him for at least 2 or 3 years where they're going to have
even for a couple. No, 100%. He's not going to sign a 1-year deal. But you get what I'm saying. There's not that many veteran options either that would even be as affordable. Sam Darnold wouldn't sign a 1-year deal at this point either, whether he's leaving Minnesota or not. He's proven enough to avoid that. Tim, I will get you out of here now. I know you had a hard out, so I appreciate the time for sure. I'll be seeing you around, and great stuff as always.
Thanks,
Happy
man.
New
Good
Year.
talking to you again. Same to you.
Yeah, I'll give you Happy New Year right now, and the next time we see each other, maybe not so much. So Tim Benz of the Tribune-Review and many other outlets throughout the Pittsburgh media circuit joining me there on Mic Drop as we went through it as best we could there in terms of on-the-field issues, off-the-field issues. There's always conversations about on-the-field and off-the-field issues when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and maybe even talking some about the future there as we're getting more into that in future shows about what to do QB-wise, because the second they are out, that's going to be a conversation that Tim and I and many others are going to be bringing up all offseason, and it's going to be a legit conversation, so we'll see what happens there. Again, Tim Benz of the Tribune-Review. You can also catch his work at a myriad of outlets, WTE being one of them, and he has Breakfast with Benz early mornings, his podcast with the Trib. So Tim keeps it real. I always appreciate people that keep it real. What he said about the media and fans is true. There are scapegoats. There's always sacrificial lambs, but there's also the holy person, the holy player, the cow that you never could go after, and it's just sacrilegious to ever think anything negative of. So I do think that's going on a little bit right now with the divide on whether it's Cam Sutton, Minkah Fitzpatrick, the player that may be being alluded to, the locker room drama. And as Tim also put it, everybody's had their issues in recent weeks, to say the least. No one's been perfect. That includes top on down. So it's very unlikely they're talking about one player that's not proven true. And it's also ridiculous if they are, because there's not just one player that's causing these problems, but the fans definitely would prefer it to be Cam Sutton, even some media members too, whereas Minkah Fitzpatrick's been very, very popular, especially among the fans. So why not go after the guy that had off-the-field drama himself, that left the team, came back, but maybe some don't want him because of the off-the-field stuff, versus Minkah, who's just really played well and been great around the locker room and with fans. His productions, those dipped. I talked about it on a past show there before the holiday break with David Todd, another Pittsburgh media colleague of ours. The Minkah's just had a rough year. It's just not been the year that people want out of Minkah, and that's been part of the secondary and the defensive issues for this team, which has also led to this current slump, and why people like Tim and myself do not believe this is a team that is going to make a deep run and is going to be a true AFC champion or Super Bowl champion or anything like that. They're not a true contender because of the defensive issues, where you expect more out of them than even the offense, which, yes, has declined, but has given you more of a sense of success this year than in past years. And I do also agree with the Wilson take. You're going to, as I brought up, you're not going to break the bank for Sam Darnold. You don't really want Kirk Cousins. Like Geno Smith, is that really better? You have Russell Wilson, who has proven it before. There's something left in the tank now, even though he's older. The offense was able to have success with him under center. If he can get healthy a whole offseason, knowing he's the guy. And yeah, he kind of knew that last year, but eventually got hurt at the end of camp. And of course, Justin Fields started the year. That might be better. You won't get him for just 1 year, as Tim brought up. It'll be 1, 2, if not 3 years. But everyone else who's a vet will be 3 years as well. Wilson will be cheaper. And yeah, you probably be better off going for a quarterback in the draft, but you're going to have to trade up to do so. And they have so many needs that would screw you for the immediate future. And as we all know, whether you like it or not, the Steelers are not going to tank a year. They're not going to go have a 3-win year. They're not going to try to do that and tank for a draft pick. That's just not what they're going to do. And they want to preserve the winning season thing for Tomlin, which has been preserved at least this year. And if that's all the mentality, then you're likely bringing Wilson back. Maybe Fields could be somebody, but he's likely going to get money elsewhere. He'll at least know that he's proven something. He has something on film from this year that's positive, and more positive, maybe more value now than a year ago. So it's leaning Wilson coming back again, even though some fans do hate the man, as he's weirdly polarizing, but it's been better than Denver for sure. So we will see what they do, because of course the other option is the draft, but really, who are you going to get there? It's a pretty thin class as Tim brought up. Again, thanks to Tim Benz of the Tribune-Review for jumping on here. Again, listen to him with Breakfast with Benz, and also read his stuff over there at the Trib and before games with EVE, with TAE, before and after games, etc. He's all over the Pittsburgh media scene, to say the very least. Again, thanks to Tim Benz here, and that'll do it for our first edition, the first episode here of Mic Drop here in 2025. You can find this episode as well as every episode of Mic Drop on the Believe Network platforms, everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc., and also available on Sirius XM stations. Happy New Year, as Tim and I put it, but not when we release the next episode. Happy New Year now for this episode of Mic Drop, but once we release the next episode, by that point, likely, Happy New Year will be gone. Once you get into the second week of January, let's say, Happy New Year is over, no longer Happy New Year. If maybe you want to keep it as a bit, okay, but let Happy New Year be a 1 week thing and that's it. So right now, Happy New Year as we open up a new year of Mic Drop here on Believe in Sirius XM.